Good evening, good morrow, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to what's going to be the first episode of our Messing with Magicals. And that's where we're going to try to dig up and find all of those archaic occult lovers who have the wisdom that we want to hear. And today, for the episode one, we are blessed and fortunate to have the one, only Soul Magic here with us. Soul Magic, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the channel.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So I'd like to start just to make sure, while I don't presume that your audience will not know you, but for those 3 or 4 listeners that we have here, tell me a bit about yourself. Who is Soul Magic?
Well, Soul Magic is really a persona that I came up with, ironically, for TikTok. Um, I wanted to deal primarily with magic, but in a different way. Most people that I've encountered so far on TikTok have been, I would say neophytes at best. A
Mhm.
lot of people I notice are leaving their traditional belief systems and are running into magic, believing that magic is a religion where, I know that it is a separate discipline from religion altogether.
Absolutely.
But I've had the opportunity to use soul magic to help some people along their way. I try not to, well, let me take that back. I go out of my way to tell people that I'm not ever going to be anybody's teacher because just my personal beliefs is just too much. How do you say? It's too much responsibility. But I will give you my view, and then hopefully you'll take that view, and then you can expand it or toss it out if it don't apply. But I just see myself as just trying to help people that are coming into this way of being.
I really like the way you described that. In fact, that was one of the first TikToks and videos of yours that got me. You were describing what magic is.
Mhm.
And effectively that it's not this thing that people perceive it as, but that it is, it goes further. It is more. Magic is a mechanism of intelligent design, of the fluidity and the connection between all living and non-living and the things in between those things.
Mhm.
And understanding that pattern. And you talked about that was one of the first things that I would say, like, keyed me into the fact that you were not a neophyte. You were not one of those who was beginning those journey, but probably one who had been here for quite some time.
It feels that way sometimes.
So, looking at that, I want to start with this first question. When I look at, oh no, okay, I'm gonna answer one that I meant to ask the last time we had the opportunity to talk, but I noticed it on your TikTok profile. It's the name. I'm Before I butcher it. It looks like an AE and then METH. How
Mhm.
do I say that, and what does it mean? What's its significance to you?
um, okay, so I would pronounce it as Emmett,
Okay.
or some people actually draw it out and say Amet. The H is silent, so it's not a meth, but it stands for, or it means truth. In some circles, it means the true man. And I ran across, not ran across, I got to get better describing things actually. Um, I was first introduced to the name through the story of Albertus Magnus.
Hmm.
Albertus Magnus created the world's first Android. Everybody think that that it was Lucas Studios that created the Android, but back in the 1200s, a Dominican friar named Albertus Magnus created an Android. And so legend has it that he created it and he put a myth on the forehead and it brought it to life. And it had its own thought process. It had its, as St. Thomas said, St. Thomas Aquinas, he thought it was diabolical because it had its own will. He thought it was devil work. So he destroyed it. And for those that don't know, St. Thomas, some say Aquinas, some say Aquinas, uh, was the one of the disciples of Albertus Magnus. Both of them are canonized by the Catholic Church, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, they were Dominican friars, or excuse me, Dominican monks of the Dominican order. You know, not to be confused with the Republic, but they were a part of the Dominican order. And so I was really fascinated with in the early days of my magic study, because what we call magic, a lot of it comes right out of the church. In fact, they're, I would say, very strong prayers, and then it kind of evolved into what we have today. But yeah, a lot of people think magic and think evil, but some of the strongest magicians are canonized saints today.
That
So,
so yeah, that I think, and that's one of the, I love the study of what's like ancient old high magic.
mhm,
You've got there's I'm a huge fan of Alphias Levi. Um,
yes,
oh, there's a book. It's The Sacred Magic of Abram Millen. Are you familiar with it?
that book I'm scared of that book.
It's it's I I feel like there's good reason for it. So what's your experience with it? What's the its
Mhm.
tale with you?
Well, that book in particular, I've stayed away from purposely. Um, And up until very recently, and I'm not equating the two because I literally do not know what's in that book, but I've
Hmm.
also avoided Enochian magic, Dr. D's invention. Um,
Yeah.
but, I've been drawn into it. It literally just came into my life, and I thought, well, I guess this is the time. But that book, uh, I was told and I've heard, and we can't believe everything that we hear, but if you don't complete that ritual, you will go crazy. It will drive you mad, insane. And Aleister Crowley, for those that aren't familiar with Aleister Crowley, uh, in a nutshell, he called himself the Great Beast, which I think was satirical, but that's neither here nor there. He attempted to perform this ritual and he didn't finish it. He did not finish it. And the events as they unfolded in his life after that point,
Ain't pretty.
yeah. So, I said, nah, unless I'm in a position, because, in Hindu culture, I'm not a Hindu, but I take from everywhere, right? Because I'm a
Hmm.
magical person. In Hindu culture, they have a phase of life called the sannyasin. And the sannyasin are the renounced. These are people that don't have jobs. They had jobs. They may have been doctors and engineers, but they quit their jobs, gave away their things, and they've become pilgrims to the world. And if I was in that phase of life where I didn't have overarching responsibilities, I might give it a go. But I'm what is known as a householder. I have a wife, I have kids, I have, family responsibilities, and I don't have time to go and do this ritual. And then, if I
To
mess
take
it
on
up,
these extreme austerities. Yeah, and I think that's so that was yeah, so it's really interesting that you said it because with Abraham that particular writing and the teachings which it suggests, I found it remarkably synonymous with some of those commandments which Christ experienced and goes through. Um,
mm,
as similarly, when you look at like what he tells his disciples to do, he didn't really give those poor bastards good things to do. It's not like, write the best text you can. He's like, no, don't take shit and just go. And when you go, stay with those who you can find to be good. And if not, dust your shoes of it. And that God have mercy on that place. For Sodom and Gomorrah would have been better.
right, right.
There's the same level of like antiquated magnitude in the magic that they're talking about. He tells there's so much of it where they're talking about, oh, they always spend this time trying to convince you on a certain degree. And there's old writing, they tell you what validated it for them, why, where they affirmed it. And that one, when he describes magic, he calls it a veritable science.
Yes. Hmm.
And it's interesting the way that he kind of hones in on this, and he separates it away from what is effectively the birthright of his eldest son, which is the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalistic teachings and those things which belong to the Jewish man in his prime, those magics, the understandings that they're in, that is the birthright of the eldest. That he couldn't give to his second son, but he loved his second son dearly. And he wanted to make sure that his second son had the same ability to succeed in life as his first, who inherited the Cabal, or the Kabbalah. And I apologize if I'm butchering it. And so what he did is he gave to his second son a book containing, the instructions for the horizon and all of these other rituals to gain and have this veritable science, because it was not equal to the Kabbalah, but of equal enough measure to sustain and generate basically the livelihood that he would have hoped for him. And so it's very interesting, especially because you said something at the start, and it was how you've noticed there's a lot of those neophytes, those baby witches, those new searchers and seekers who are leaving their parent faith.
Right.
They're leaving that parent, that where they began. And in that book, yeah, it's a part of the cycle, but there's dangers to that, because inherently, if there's a universal truth that all things are built upon, you may encounter the repetition of those truths somewhere else that you previously rejected in your own, and that causes a personal confliction where you're like, well, wait, I thought, I decided I wasn't a Christian anymore. Why am I coming back to this concept of the Trinity? Or so you have to then reconcile with what exactly is your truth.
All right. Can I chime in on that
Yeah,
idea?
please, absolutely.
Yeah. See, for me, like a lot of people in America, I grew up in a Christian household. Now, my Christian household was a tradition handed down from my great grandparents. I think maybe the last time we talked, it may have came up that this church still stands in Baltimore City today. It's called Carter Memorial Church, and that Christianity came down to my mother in a very strict manner. And so when she handed it to me, it was really from an intellectual standpoint. It wasn't from, going to church every day, that kind of thing. It was more like, she ordered what's the word? My vocabulary. Correspondence series from a pastor in Texas named, well, he's passed away by now, but his name was R.B. Theme, and I think his son took over the ministry or what have you. But at any rate, I ended up getting a really intellectual viewpoint of Christianity from him. And when I say intellectual, he would literally in the tape, I'm like 7 and 8, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10. We listened to it for like 4 or 5 years. And he would break down the words to the Greek, then the Hebrew, and it was just so tedious for me being 7 or 8. I had no appreciation for it. It ended up coming back to me later in life, ironically, when I decided to leave Christianity. But when I left Christianity, it's not like the way people are leaving it today. Um, I kind of gradually moved away from Christianity. I went from being a Baptist Christian to a Rastafarian, which is essentially Christianity with different clothes on.
Right, right.
And then from that phase, because I forgot to type the last point. I read in the Bible that if God, my thinking was if God is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, then I should be able to look in any religious tradition and find this God.
Boom.
And I found it in Rastafarianism. I found it later. I converted to Islam, a non-orthodox version of Islam called Moorish Science. And then I converted to Orthodox Islam for a period of time. I want to say about 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into this point within my person where the labels really became obsolete. I saw it. Everyone was trying to achieve the same thing. Everyone was going to the same place. In fact, the Muslims and Jews and Christians, this is the same family. I'm like, why are they fighting each other in real time? But their scriptures seem to confirm one another as being family, you know? So I kind of just drifted away from, I guess, the God idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I think what we're trying to experience transcends even that word.
That's a really, I think that's a uniqueness to it, because that was a, again, TikTok, it's a very powerful medium. There was a video which came by, and it led to, I think it was it's the first of the eightfold path. First, it's like
Hmm.
right view,
Hmm.
and this emanating idea that if you worship, or if you place focus or attention on anything that has impermanence, then
Right.
effectively that quest is flawed. It's not a good venture. And everything that you can conceive of, idea, what could happen in the, everything, every thought, this connect, they're all impermanent. And so the quest then becomes understanding what is permanent, and understanding how we connect and engage with this. And so when you talk about God transcending effectively the book itself, accepting or transcending the writings, or transcending the experiences that were given, and there was a universalism that was unspeakable, that is ineffable, that is understood, that we can look into, like, they're all very similar, but they're not, you
Hmm.
know, but they're almost inherently divisive. They're inherently based to separate. When you look at those three founding faiths which dominate our world,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they come from the same, the same place, the same heart, the same teaching, the same world, and yet they stand more divided than ever.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. I really can't account for why that is, other than, you know, if I were to revisit my religious days when I was going to church, or when I was going to Rastafarian meetings, and when I lived in Trinidad and Tobago, or when I was going to the mosque, another thing that they all had in common was this, for lack of a better word, was this dogma, this set of traditional beliefs that ran concurrent with what was in their books. And it always seemed to vest really the power into some central being at the top who wasn't God, but was somehow ordained to talk to God on your behalf.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's that's, so it's funny the way that relates to like cultural pyramid schemes, right?
Exactly.
You have people who they don't want to let the power go. They don't want to, and I'll admit, finding who I would call and describe to be the worthy and well educated,
Hmm.
it has been increasingly difficult in an age of information, because it seems like the skill of dissemination and discernment is not equally being taught alongside of how to access and how to engage. I had a conversation and a debate with another brother in a lodge, and these always, I kind of use them as my golden standard. Like if I have a conversation like this with a Mason, I presume no one is exempt.
Mm.
um and we got heavily into basically a debate over, it started on the premise of, he described the Christ like figure of the Buddhist faith, of the Hindu faith,
Hmm.
and he said that in their core they are the antithesis to Christ.
Oh, come on.
and,
What?
and I was like, where can you, like, and so I just started like logically stepping through his argument. I'm like, because I've read the text that you're referring, my friend, and I don't like, that you're there's no part where they really separate from each other, like they, and we went through this whole conversation, and in the end he fell back on a point which was, well, it's because I believe, it's because I believe it, it's because that's just how I believe.
Yeah.
And it was this halt. You can be devout, right? You can be a part of all of the organizations, look great on paper, but inevitably, if you aren't willing to go where it's uncomfortable to ask the hard questions, you will stop. You will be caught in that cultural box that runs aside the motivation of those high scholarly ideals or teachings. Like in Masonry, there's the reason you are there, and then there's sometimes the reason you stop pushing in your studies. I was very attracted to the esoteric approach, all of the symbols, and it was easy to talk with old Masons from day one about the symbols in their lodges, because of the universalism represented in it. And often there were many of them who had been there for 50 years, but didn't know, or they had never taken it that far.
Right.
So it's like there's you've got those two sides that run so heavily.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I think the idea of faith, I think in order to do anything on planet Earth, you have to have it. But what I found that's common among religious religious beliefs, and I'm gonna also extend this to political beliefs because politics, in my view, is a kind of a
I'm
religious,
like, yeah, I see that. I see that.
yeah. And I think you have to have faith, as I mentioned, to proceed forward. But I'm always reminded of what I was told about faith, hope, and charity, and that faith is lost in sight. So that tells me that you work towards your faith being objective as opposed to allowing it to remain just subjective, just a theory. You supposed to, as you say, ask the hard questions, because if it doesn't stand up, then it's not true. It's not.
I
Amen.
love falling into the, what is just allegory, and because it's a powerful tradition, especially in Freemasonry. But
Mhm.
imagine building a house and never checking the angles.
Sheesh.
You're if you just assumed that because it looked like a rock, it was a rock, because it looked square and level, that it was not, that it actually is. This point to checking your angles, to checking the mark and the integrity of the individual, the small things, especially when it comes to those little actions in our life, those little habits that we do. And don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
like I love TikTok. I love, or like what I would call the age of information. The fact that all of us, not all of us, but so many of us now have access to each other,
Right.
and rapid access to information, the internet, and these things. But I also, there's danger to it because it's without a proper system, right? And I think this has to be an individual system, not like, if you're not a part of the church or the body, what? No, but I mean, just like if the individual does not have a system of guidance based on their individual morality that
Mhm.
is echoing this universal morality,
Mhm.
I think it can be, we're almost at risk for greater confusion, greater loss of light by getting it meddled with. So like, I've seen some of, like, lately, all of the conspiracy theories that come out with such touted authoritative, like, this is how it is, like, just because people can say that is how it is, and the power behind some of these statements
Yes.
versus
Yes.
the reality of having it backed by fact or evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going by faith as well, because invariably they say the same thing. I go down the rabbit hole with them, and what I've noticed is that people, you're right. Let me back up. The information age, in my view, is the second coming of the dark ages.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's counterintuitive based on it being called the information age. But like an eye, if you shine too much light in it too fast, you can blind it.
That's a really good analogy. And I think, especially with the way you have to manage light, light in its intensity has to be broken out. Even light from the sun is broken out across our atmosphere. We don't
Correct.
get it all intense.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. When I first began consciously dealing with ceremonial magic
Mm-hmm.
back in the late 1990s, I don't do, if anyone hears this and they're new, do not do what I did.
Yeah, this is a do. This is do what I say, not what I do.
Yes. I was not ready at all, but a friend of mine had put me on to some, and when I say put me on, introduced me to the works of some uh, deliberate creation people. And from there, I somehow ended up uh, with Aleister Crowley,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And I tell people all the time, I'm not really a big fan of Aleister Crowley, though I do respect the things that he stood for in his time, because I imagine it had to have been tough growing, living in that time period, professing the things that he did. But
Mm-hmm.
that was like in terms of ceremonial magic, that was my introduction. And it wasn't
Christ.
magic without tears kind of introduction, which will be a logical beginning. I was into, like, trying to find the deeper meanings in his equinox writings,
Yeah, I mean, you're talking into the shit of it, especially with such a basis from where you began, as you described. Having that very like unconsciously, you would have had what I would describe as like an analytical approach.
Yes,
And
yes,
when so that you're trying to reason as the whys and the what fors and the motivations behind all of the incredible intricate ceremonialism.
yes, yes. And I also came to believe, I was able to get beyond, because again, coming from a Christian background, there's some things that can be done to, or put in your path, I would say, or that will shut you down. Something
Mhm.
like someone calling themselves the Great Beast 666 is a red flag for me, you know. And so as I continued, I had to go away from it and get understanding, because I realized I didn't really know what the Satan concept was,
Right.
I got an idea of it, like I don't want to die and go to hell because Satan is there, basic.
Yeah.
But in terms of my looking into it, I realized that at every door, and when I say door, every entrance to a new school of thought, I think Satan guards that door. I think Satan is created to keep people out.
Well
I
said.
think I think people that I think religious beliefs are generally broken up based on economics. The people who are at the top of the economic chain, they get, quote unquote, the true message. Working class gets another message. Poor people and so forth, the undesirables get another message. And so I always looked at it like Satan was created by the upper economic people. Like, let's say in the Bible, the Levites. The Levites weren't supposed to have any inheritance, but they still had a monopoly on the Ark of the Covenant, the Day of Atonement, things like that. And of course, I believe they set up certain mechanisms to keep people from going beyond the veil. Literally, you couldn't go beyond the veil if you was
There's
a regular person, you know. And I think that is what Satan is. Satan is the adversary. He's the divider, and literally the veil divides one side from the other. So once I got that kind of understanding, again, not saying that that's a fact for anybody, but I'm just saying that's how I came to view it. I was able to proceed with reading through Crowley's works, and it's not where someone new to magic should start. It
that's
it really created a lot of conflict in my internal dialogue.
So, do you feel like what do you really feel like was the root of that? Do you think it was that he wrote with such experientialism? That's why I'm probably creating a new word or butchering it brutally. But like, he wrote based off of so much of what he visualized and like created in his mind. He was a master storyteller.
Yes.
And he was a master, like many of those manipulators, and honestly, anybody who's really good at making what I would say the unconscious move. You're a
Yes.
storyteller. You're gonna make magic conscious without necessarily them realize that that's what you've done. You told a story, you painted a picture, you incepted a thought, and that seeded its way into physicality by
Mhm.
their by the ritual, especially like when you draw. That's the purpose of ritual in most places, is to facilitate an experience.
Yes. Hmm.
And he was
Absolutely.
very good at creating these experiences, and he used such, I would say, inflammatory and challenging language. That's it. I couldn't have imagined being him in the age he was. That sounds particularly daunting. And then when you looked at like earlier, when you looked at like what is the legacy that he created, because did he succeed in the great workings that were basically at the root of what he began, when he did the rituals presented in the book of the Sacred Magic of Abram Millennia. He took on these impossible, not impossible, but archaic and ancient challenges to
Mhm.
conquer the self, and he failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you, sorry, and I know I had a question and then went off on a tangent. Why do you think that his work has such a reactive response in people who first meet it?
It, I think for everything that you mentioned, but you don't necessarily know that when you're reading it. You don't necessarily know how advanced his mind is. You don't necessarily know while you're reading it that he's assuming that you have read his other stuff. He's assuming that you're a high level intellect capable of breaking his codes, because even what he's putting forward with in what appears to be plain English isn't. It's
Right.
like it's like a person, and I'm not, I'm not trying to rank anybody here or anything, because I know when I say this name, a lot of people going to think, in terms of, you know, correlation. I'm not doing that, because a lot of people would say that Eminem is the greatest rapper of all time. So when I mention Eminem and I make this comparison, I'm not saying Crowley is the greatest magician of all time. I just want to say that, but
Mhm.
I think if you were first getting into hip hop and you wanted to listen to hip hop, and I don't think you should start with Eminem, because his wordplay, the amount of the how he uses his syllables is just too advanced. Start off with some, EPMD or something like that, and work
Yeah.
your way up. I feel like that with Crowley. You should at least know, what the elements are. You should know how they interplay. Very basic stuff. You should know. Like I think I started with it was 777. I read that book 3 times and I was no smarter from where I began, because I couldn't penetrate the proverbial veil that Crowley had going on.
So when
And
you look, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And he also, it was coupled with, he had a gematria section and then another section with tables of correspondences, which again, I guess I'm a late bloomer in a sense, because now in my life, some 20 something odd years later, I see correlations in everything. So I kind of attributed that ability to being exposed to his information. But again, I don't think that's where people should start.
Yeah, well, I think, and so yeah, that's, I wouldn't challenge that at all. Shit. It's like, I mean, well, to be honest, it's the same point of, like, you could take the Bible, right?
Hmm.
You take any sacred text, there's a part of it which is rooted in, like, historical or cultural relevance and experience.
Hmm.
That is based off of a lot. And it's always going to emanate from some individual aspect or view. So even you can take spaces where in the Bible they write about the Jewish people,
Right.
God's children. There's an individualism. There is an inherent, like, there's a circle, there's a bubble, an area of influence that's being referenced in this space. It's not always this universalism that gets applied to a lot of things.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So I have a segue in this, just to one question which I'm really curious of for you,
Okay.
because I'm a practitioner of varying what I would call shadoic rites. I spend a lot of time in the unconscious and in the formless.
Okay.
And I notice those current makers, those wielders of the unconscious, who are capable of shifting and manifesting reality when they are moved to do it. And I always look at it's a when they are moved to do it. You in particular, when I first encountered you, had a legacy to you. There was a lot of, like, past life soul experience where you are a collective. You talk about your works, your teachings. You take a lot from a lot of things, and certain things fit immediately. Other things, it's you mold them a bit.
Hmm.
In your uh, you know I like it to word it this way, but in the thousands of years that I perceive that you've been a witness and a watcher to humanity in its rise and its falls, as you look at this iteration, do you believe that they will go beyond those perceived levels or limits of the past generations?
Woo. Okay. If I had to call it today, if it was like a basketball game and we had 10 seconds left,
Yeah.
I don't think they're gonna make it.
Yeah, fair.
And the reason is this. The reason is that there is so much going against new practitioners. Well, everybody, but so much going against practitioners today. And for example, just to be able to manifest something, you have to be able to concentrate. And our society in America, anyway, is set up so that you digest information and, you know,
60 second
15
intervals.
by, say again?
I was making a shot at TikTok and their 60-second intervals. Like,
Yes, yes. That was great actually, because when I first came to TikTok, it was because my daughter wanted to get on TikTok, so I wanted to go scope it out before giving her the green light.
uh-huh.
And I thought to myself, how is somebody supposed to convey a message of any substance in 60 seconds? How is that going to happen? So the whole idea of concentration is key, as you know, to magic. You cannot allow your mind to wander. It has to be on the work.
I'm making such a like a face palm because if you're so right. And I think something you had said earlier in our conversation, when you look at how, I always reference in the old days, I feel like an old man, but like in ancient times, we lived in a different way that was not based off of comfort and immediate convenience. You
Mhm.
spent hours a day by your father or by your mother, if it was weaving, if it was cooking, if it was harvesting, sowing, planting, hunting. You learned power in extended focus because you didn't have instant and immediate distraction.
Right.
And we live in an age, and we live in the age of distraction. I don't want to call it the age of information. I feel like it's the age of distraction.
It is. It is. I think at one point when it first began, it was the age of information, but we've passed over into the age of distraction, essentially flooding the world with so much information that effectively you're no better than your counterparts in the dark ages.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the distraction factor, I think, is the number one thing that humanity, well, I'm not going to say humanity, I'm going to say in the United States because I haven't been all over the world.
Mm.
It's the number one thing that we will have to overcome before we can make any significant leeway in magic. I would say that the current iteration does have the advantage of being born into a world where this information is readily available. But as you mentioned, they will need someone credible to help guide them through it. And as it stands now in the distraction circuit, I can go on TikTok. If somebody pissed me off, I can go in there and search hex magic and then jump right in and think I'm hexing somebody, not knowing the first thing
Oh
about
God,
magic.
baby witches and witch talk. I started on TikTok with this particular like fury against it.
Hmm.
Like when it, like I joined it out of pure speculative nature, not speculative, skeptical nature. I'm like, this is stupid. I'm not joining it. I refuse. And then inevitably I got on, like everybody does, and
Yeah.
got pulled into the vortex. And when it comes to magic, you talked about like what it takes to manifest reality and how you get to that point.
Hmm.
Focus is required, and this feels like unconscious, almost like DNA manipulation, in
Yeah.
the way that there are just so many people, billions of people, that are all like their ability to focus is being broken down. I mean, I'll be honest, 7 days off TikTok was really hard. It was
Yeah.
really hard. I thought about it every day.
Hmm.
I wanted to get on it and to think. And then even when I wasn't on it, I still found these little just snippets of things coming to myself. So it's like nothing. I couldn't be on anything. I had to really go sit and just be with the book, go get outside, because that was the only place I was not affected by these stimuli, these distractors.
Yeah. I think TikTok, and I don't want to just pick on TikTok. I'm gonna say it, the way our culture has united itself with technology, the singularity, if you will, um, is a problem. It's soul snatching. And when I say soul snatching, I'm being figurative, but I'm also attempting to be literal. I, I have a hard time scrolling through TikTok and remaining aware of my body. For me,
That's
my
interesting.
personal, yeah, for my personal being, I always keep some awareness in my body, you know,
Right.
so I don't get lost in my thoughts. My body is my anchor, right? To this plane anyway. And with TikTok, the content changes so much because it's a minute is over, you on to the next, on to the next. So I find myself completely living in my thoughts and I've lost awareness of my body. I think that's a problem, um, not only for me but for everyone. Effectively, if we lose that connection, the mind-body connection, then we will effectively evolve into zombies. It's not really a joke or anything. We will really evolve into that.
Could I
Um,
tell
mhm,
you a story? And this is just one we've talked a bit about before. I had this weird obsession with Atlantis and the Emerald Tablets.
mhm.
Um,
Oh,
Go
yes,
ahead.
please, please.
So
Mhm,
so this is just because this is like you have literally described and told something in that last part that I'm like, this has happened before. Um, Atlantis was what came before it, because for all intents and purposes, it was the capital, it was the pinnacle and the culmination of eras and generations past. It was its predecessor was Lemuria, and then its predecessor was Mu. Mu was a society of effective world builders. These were the hunter gatherers who lived in harmony with nature, building and modeling the beginning form of man. They were the caretakers who basically allowed us to understand and build our forms to what we needed, what was available, not what we could live within our environment.
mhm.
And that society rose and fell, and from it was created the Lemurians. And the Lemurians, their focus was not harmony with nature, but mastery over it. They were the alchemists. They were those who could take and for all intents and purposes, do what the last 100 years of our society represents, and that's dominate nature. They could use its power, its forces to channel energy. They could create electricity. They were complicated enough to create technology, but not wise enough to understand where that technology should stop, where that innovation should stop. And the consequence, inevitably, was they foresaw their own destruction. And the way that they chose to prevent it was they realized that effectively light could be encoded onto crystal,
Yes.
and that the soul in its root form is light, and that
Mhm.
in order to preserve themselves, they could in fact encode their soul onto crystal.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so they performed a series of rites, and they built a technology in their society which transmuted their consciousness collectively, not all of them, but the heart of them, those with that represented the influential minority. And they were seeded into these crystals where the masses then fell into these places, but the technology was lost to recover them because they didn't value the majority, because they
Mhm.
didn't place focus on the integrity, just in this continuity. And so they were lost. And today, if you find a crystal that has striations, so it could be like a quartz crystal, if it has striations, equal line striations on every facet and face, this is called a Lemurian crystal, because
Mhm.
it has encoding on it. These lines are individual, like 101001, like records. And if you spend time in meditation, holding and channeling with them, you can access and read the information to the souls that have been encoded on them. And there's so much trauma and
Mhm.
and mutation and malfeasance that exists oftentimes in these crystals because of the the, it didn't go the way they thought. That wasn't how it was supposed to happen, and inevitably you become responsible for breaking it, not breaking it, but releasing that information, taking it into yourself and disseminating it back out, so that what they represented as an addition to the collective all isn't lost. And
Yeah.
so when you talk about that soul sucking component, that, like, even if I consider that my collective knowledge, my legacy, is what I could impart to the generation behind me, right now we capture that information not in story, not in experience, but in video, in digital media.
Mhm. Mhm. Digital media, absolutely. That reminds me of back in the early 2000s, something that stuck with me and I've observed over the years. I found to be true. I went to go and get a job at a place called Media Play. It was one of my first earliest conscious experiences in making something happen, like just willing something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me to Media Play. And I decided while I was there, I'd already manifested what I wanted to manifest. I decided to ask for a job. So I filled out the paperwork and I'm talking to the assistant manager. And he gives me this kid at the time I was 27, 26, 27. He maybe have been 19 or 20. And he gave me a whole history on media. And one thing that stood out in his history was that whenever people have personal problems and then the world has a collective problem, the use of media increases. And I didn't know that to be true at the time, but living in 2021, he was absolutely correct. You know, this as I
Holy shit, that's so cool. You say that. Um in Atlantis, the what was the capital like mark of that society was
mhm,
a system called the Muses. And so effectively there was a caste of slaves that were highly venerated, painted in gold. They lived in perfect, untouched life. They were positioned in every profession, in every place. If you were a banker, a carver, a fisherman, but everywhere that was within this city, you were within the presence of a muse. And a muse was an individual who channeled light, they channeled energy into themselves to inspire. And there was belief in inspiration because inspiration translated into art. And art was perceived to be the purest form of knowledge
yeah,
because it was not uh, it was as direct and definite as it was subjective and interpretive.
mhm, mhm,
And it's just so, but that way it was perceived as media. All you did, if you were the fisherman, if it was, everything was perceived as a media, a form of art. And so I had never drawn the connection between that and the fact that Atlantis was the last mark of a high civilization, a high society before collapse.
mm.
And you like, with what you just said, I'm like, shit,
It was the media.
shit.
Yeah, yeah. The media, I think, is so interesting. Just I may have mentioned, you may not know actually. But I'm an IT guy by profession, and the idea of media being either wired or wireless media, and then getting an understanding that media is just something that information travels through or over to get to you.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, your ears are media. It actually amplifies the sound for your eardrums to be able to pick it up. However, the sound gets to you, however, the communication gets to you, that's the media. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that the media, quote unquote, is the news or whatever you might see on TV or what we call social media, is really going back, I think, to the idea, which can be found in the Bible, of protecting what you put in your eyes and your ears because it affects your heart.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, we're not, we're not responsibly using media.
No. I agree. I think that's where I look at it. In the age of distraction, so that big question, right? We gonna make it. The answer, no. I'm with you. I don't intend to be an nihilist by nature, and that's not my space. I'm a
Mhm,
realist, and I
mhm.
believe when I look at realistically actions in space taken, I don't believe that we're going to be able to to recover because there is so much. Ironically, it's like, unfortunately, if the world was run by Freemasons, right? If that perceived super body of control worked, the world would be better. But it
Yeah,
doesn't, and there is no singular anything. Everybody has this individual right, and information is so widely disseminated and differentiated that the difference between individual points on the vast waveform of life is, it's almost impossible to understand unless you are what I would call one of the servants, or one of those who stepped outside of those cycles, and you can see them and you can perceive them, and you're either in support, neutral engagement, or non-engagement, or in confliction to the very same component.
yeah, yeah. I did want to kind of go back. If it was 10 seconds left in a quarter, we're not going to make it. But naturally, I'm trying to be an optimist. That's my
Mhm.
natural nature, is to have hope. And what I do find though is that even though there is a distraction, there's so many people who are just walking around in everyday life with the knowledge needed to help this new iteration, but they don't know that they're needed. Like, for example, this whole thing, like, through TikTok, which is weird because, I've been on social media since
Since social media started.
yeah, going back to like the Yahoo days, that was a form of social media, right?
On my
So,
AOL.
so I've been on it forever, and I've never found myself in this unique place where like people who don't know me from a hole in the ground flood my inbox constantly asking me questions about magic because they viewed my content and say, well, one thing I know about you is that you're upfront, you're not going to tell no lies, and you say that it's your opinion. So and it's just a lot of people with this kind of information, they don't know they were needed there, you
And
know.
this is why we transition to you, masters of soul magic. This is when we look at the you like I'm going to say the whole class of created being that you incarnate and then you represent, and that is in many spaces a teacher.
Hmm.
You it's like there are, there is an era of change. The gods, for all intents and purposes, are just those who have the ability to perceive those greater systems of causality and instruct, incite, and guide those who can't yet perceive them so that they can.
Hmm.
And when you look at that calling, I do think, that collectively there, a call has been made and it has been answered, that people are waking up, that there are lifetimes that are being remembered. I mean, COVID alone has created such a societal and cultural shift that in our collective human history, it runs in core with turning points, with those quantum points where we know them today because the earth bears their mark.
Hmm.
And when, I think it's a responsibility on a certain level, and that's why it's hard for so many of us who are teachers, but we're teachers of not dogma, but we are teachers of experience or methodology. There's a reason to the madness, and usually because it will push you out of the places you may not want to go. In the digital medium, oftentimes it can be very kind to people in their preferences.
Yeah.
And I remember, I can recall lifetimes being the initiation rites to
Hmm.
begin something, to do something, were so extreme. The austerity so high
Yeah.
that there was no way. Like you said, you're a family. You're a homekeeper. You don't have just 40 days. You could just chop off to go do this thing.
Right.
You know, it, we live in a different time, in a different era, and it's not that it's a there's we should. I don't think there should be a I don't think we should all go back to that kind of radicalism, but so within this space, within this realm, this is one of my so welcome to my imaginary world. That way we're protected by any perceived conversations. What god are you? What divinity are you? What is your job? What is your role to humanity? Who are you?
You asking that to me
Yes.
directly?
Yes, to you directly.
Uh, it's interesting that I've been thinking about that today. I'm often drawn to the story of the I am that I am, that a lot of who are Christians, they know of that when Moses asked quote unquote God, who shall I say sent me? Say, I am that I am. And then I've gone on in life and I've come across people who say God's actual nomenclature, his actual name is I am that I am, or whatever it translates to in Greek or Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And I am that I am I take it more like the phrase of today, it is what it is, because when we start to label a thing, it becomes that thing. I would assume in ancient Atlantis and Lemuria, uh, this would have been a concept. The idea of having two names, which I came across in Egypt studies,
Mm-hmm.
having two names, a big name and a little name. The world at large got the little name, and the individual and the family kept the big name. Kind of like my name is Antonio, but my family calls me Tony. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of who I am, I look at it like I am whatever is needed and I am able to do in that given moment. So we'll read in a lot of scripture that, on one hand we'll say God is good, but then you'll have passages where God says, I am the one who created evil. Whatever is needed at that time, that's what I'll be. And my propensity, or my leaning, I should say, is to share what I have in my head with other people and see what they think about it. And that comes across in this world as being a teacher. Really, I'm just sharing stuff that, I'm walking around with and didn't really see a public need for until now. I thought this was just something that I was doing. I didn't know any other people practicing magic. I still don't in real time. And if I go outside, my friends group, they don't
Mhm.
practice magic. My lodge doesn't practice. Nobody in my lodge practices magic.
Yeah, dude,
You
I get that.
know?
I'll be honest. I really hoped when I started into the fraternity, I was like, I went into it with some serious esoteric, like ritualistic hopes. Like, like, oh, this is gonna be my like. I really did, and then I was like, I was not sorely disappointed.
Mhm.
I had set expectations disproportionate. Like I just got way too imaginative with, I put too much into it. And it's not that you can't find those things, because I'll be honest, like, you are a Mason and I am a Mason, and we're able to meet on the things and the values that I started in search for.
Right.
So I know that there is purpose and propensity and ability for there to find those things and to find, that ritual. But I it's hard. We are few and far between. And while there still may be thousands or hundreds of thousands, there's
Yeah.
billions of people in this world.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't stack up too high in our favor.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, going back to the idea of who I am, what God I am, I think I'm the same God that you are. I think I'm the same God that at our
Hmm.
essence or at our core, at our source. I'm the same God that the people listening to this podcast are, even though they might not necessarily think they're gods, but you'll come to the truth in your own time. But I think we're trying to we're trying to transcend the distractions and so forth, and somehow I have a relatively small role in it, and maybe I help someone who has a bigger role, or they may influence somebody who has a larger role. But I try to live up to the idea of truth, and if we're going to make it to through this iteration, as you said, it has to be a we. It
Yeah.
can't be an I. Like, and like I said, I grew up Christian, so forgive me. But like what Jesus is said to have said, um, if you strike the shepherd, the sheep scatter. So that tells me everyone has to be a leader. The days of following are over.
Hmm. I like that analogy. And to be honest, I am not a Christian and wouldn't claim that title and haven't for years. But I love Christian analogy, and I will debate and discuss and go into every like, I think somebody asked a bit by like, what version of the Bible do I read? Everyone I could possibly find.
Yes.
I love that story, and it's so powerful. It's so unique, and I definitely wouldn't say anything against it. One
Mhm.
particular space that I like, and this is just in regards to like the Bible, because you talked about how in the Bible you will read that God, they say God is all good, but likewise they also give you moments where if He's all good, then what the fuck? Because this horrible thing that I just read about the multitudes and masses that were killed or that were annihilated by the hand, by the word, and by the way, that doesn't sound all good.
Yeah.
You're met with a certain kind of confliction. People have a perception of Jesus, and because I love the Christ concept, the Christ figure, how it's universal. And I don't
Hmm.
look at Christ as this word Christ as belonging to Christianity. I think Christ was adopted, but effectively it's a term which would emanate, from enlightened and elevated. But Christ is perceived as being, peaceful. He's the Prince of Peace. There's one verse, it's in Matthew, it's Matthew something 17, I think it's 17:34, I don't know. But Christ says, I did not come to bring peace. I came to be a sword.
Right.
I came to turn sons against their fathers, mothers against their daughters. He's like, I came to fuck shit up. I came to be the challenge, the
Hmm.
agitator, the friction that causes change for the better, change for this. And so when you talk about this, the concept of the shepherd, there is an individual right to lead, but to lead yourself and to lead by example, not lead by a right of authority.
Right.
You didn't, you don't see yourself as a teacher. You see yourself as a storyteller, somebody who's sharing what they have experienced, not as an instructor due to some dogma or degree you've received. You're just telling you're sharing you, and through that people are finding that there's commonality, that there's similarity, and that you maybe made it further in the book than they were able to get.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't understand at the time what it was for. As I mentioned earlier, I lived in Trinidad for some period of time, and it was before I moved there, I had converted to Rastafarianism. I want to say late 1994
Mm-hmm.
and 95, somewhere around there, I converted to Rastafarian. If convert is a word that could be applied to this way of being. And so with that, I read literally everything I could get my hands on. Of course, in those days, we had to go down to the good old library. We couldn't just hop on Google.
Yeah, I know internet. You actually had to read.
Right. And so, of course, I'm reading everything I can. And, it sounds cliche, but after reading Bob Marley's autobiography, Catch a Fire, um, I read about the 12 tribes of Israel. They were actually the Rastafarian sect that Bob Marley was a part of before he died. On his deathbed, he converted to Coptic Christian, but
I didn't
so
know
he
that.
wasn't. He wasn't a Rastafarian when he died. He was a Coptic when he died back in 1980.
A Coptic Christian. I'm not familiar with that. My when I hear the word Coptic, my mind immediately thinks Egypt.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so
Ab-
what could you help me understand a bit better?
Well, Coptic Christianity is comes out of what is called Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity.
Oh,
Yes, and it is
okay.
it is the Copts. They are heavily associated with Egypt. In general, what we call Ethiopia and Egypt, they're heavily influenced by one another. In the Bible, they call them Cush and Mizraim. I believe they were brothers, if I recall correctly. So there's a heavy influence there, and so the Rastafarian movement. The centerpiece of the movement is Haile Selassie I, who was the last emperor of Ethiopia. So that's why he
Selassie.
converted to a Coptic Christian. It was
Interesting.
Rita, his wife, that oversaw the conversion to Coptic Christianity because she was afraid that he had given his life to this new upstart religion and possibly was going to go to hell.
Hmm. I mean,
So
okay. If I was happy wife, happy life.
yeah, 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 absolutely.
Wow.
So I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going to.
Hey, well, welcome. See, that tells me you've truly entered into the Hippie Queen studios, because there's the smoke, the aura of smoke just lingering.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So,
So if we roll, I'm trying to think, if rather than rolling back, let's roll forward.
okay.
When you look at your magical practices, when you
Mhm,
look at the things that, especially at this point in time in your life,
mhm.
what would you encourage those beginning practitioners to really prioritize? There's a lot of outside unnecessary things that you've probably gone through and then understood the core and critical. What would you offer, what would you give to those people who have, your followers, who are coming here and seeking more information? They want to know, how do I get to this understanding of magic this soul's talking about?
Yeah.
What do I do?
I would say the very first thing you have to do is demystify yourself. As said before, magic is science. When we look at the healthcare profession, for example, this is magic. But today it is so common that we're unable to appreciate exactly what is happening there. As we know, chemistry coming out of alchemy, we get hypnosis out of mesmerism. All of these, we get astronomy from astrology.
Mhm.
These are people who say, okay, I have a question. I'm going to use the scientific method in a different way from the established norm, and so that makes this a cult. That makes this look, not as viable. So I would say to anyone that is starting out, understand what you're doing is scientific. It's not just sitting around and saying some words of power with an intention in order to have a certain event come to pass, which is, low level magic, or trying to seek your holy guardian angel. Is not just that. It's a scientific practice. I think everyone should have a journal. I think everyone should keep a dream journal, and you should also keep a ritualistic journal. And your ritualistic journal should consist of, the time that you're doing a ritual, the mood that you were in, um, the the phase of the moon, the sign that the sun is in, the time, everything. And I guess this comes from Crowley. Everything matters.
Mm-hmm.
And then describe how the ritual went. Were you feeling it or not? And things like that. A dream journal for some may seem like something that is useless for them. Some people don't dream. I was that way when I first started a dream journal. About the age of 16, I stopped dreaming. Like, I would just go to sleep and wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And this went on for about a decade. And so when I got a dream journal, I thought I'd never use it, but I put it by the side of my bed, and 3 days later, I started dreaming again. I guess it was the intention to have a dream that caused the dreams to kick off again.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, intention. Yeah. Wayne Dyer, he was one of my favorite authors, and he had this series that he did on PBS called The Power of Intention. And you know, that's another thing that newbies would need to know. Like, why are you using the magic? Because the magic is not a substitute for the work. The magic is a supplement to the work.
That is an important distinction. I mean, holy crap. I feel like there was one singular takeaway that right there could encapsulate it. So many baby witches are like, I'm going to hex, I'm going to do this thing, but I'm not going to go out and put the fucking work in.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love traditional like magic and ritualistic systems because it's like, yeah, you had to get your ass up and out and haul shit to a place that nobody else had been to,
Mhm.
this was more like camping than it was like, oh, you put salt in the bowl on your nightstand. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not knocking anybody's ritual, but
Mhm.
I'm saying that the level you are able to move your physicality through experience, that will drive your mental ability to manifest reality.
Yes.
Like when you're sweating for your workout, you're like, man, I did good. Visualizing and understanding that you worked for it, that allows you to appreciate what you see in the mirror more rather than being like, man, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I'm not there yet.
Yes. Absolutely. And for me, I think you know, I'm a I deal with hypnotherapy as well. So I've been exposed to what they call the modalities of influence. They say that hypnosis is the second oldest modality, religion being the first one, in terms of influencing people. And they say that it started in Egypt, ironically, but I digress. For me, rituals is a way of staying in that particular mind frame. Like we were talking about intention. No, why are you doing the magic? Because for me, it's not necessarily that I'm not trying to really get into my practices per se, but let's just say it's not there's no intrinsic value necessarily of me facing the east other than that the east represents something to me, and it
Mm.
is impressing upon my mind that thing is whatever movement that I take in a ritual, whatever words that I'm saying. For me, all of this is to impress the subconscious mind, and then the subconscious mind is what does the work. Again, it can only work through you. So it's not just, if your intention is to manifest, let's say $30 for something, it's not going to be enough to impress your mind and then sit down somewhere and hope this $30 comes out of
Nowhere.
thin air. I'm not saying that can't be done, but the average person just starting out training their mind, I'm pretty sure it's not going to work out that way. You're going to have to take some positive action towards that goal. And you will, through your own experience, see certain things that you might classify as miraculous happening. That's the magic kicking
Right.
in.
Yeah, absolutely. That even falls in line with Hermetic teaching. Just it's not even just Hermetic teaching, but science, cause and effect.
Yes.
Nothing happens without reason. Nothing happens without purpose.
Hmm.
All energy that goes out gets pulled into different systems. It gets absorbed in different ways, and understanding how that energy moves is so critical. I think this is just the basis of magic. And I love this, magic, science, they're synonymous. So many people, especially, and as I love that when you get into what I would call little debates with lower frequency individuals
Yeah.
about the ethics or the morality to practicing magic. And I'm like, listen, you would not be if magic was not. None of this would be. Magic in its own right isn't something that like I could practice. You can't argue it because your book says it is or isn't. Magic is something. It's what's holding us together.
Right.
It's the inherent force that moves behind gravity. It's the entropy which consumes all things. Magic is more than the little thing that you're looking at it as. Kind of like when Eve, similarly in Freemasonry, a lot of people will struggle with, we require a belief in a divinity, in a deity, not in a deity, but in a supreme belief in a divine.
Yes.
And like I've had conversations with brethren who they consider themselves atheistic, but they believe in geometry and the power of geometry and the universality to geometry, and that is their God, that is their divine conception. And
Hmm.
they are just, that qualifies. It's not so it's about reaching a level of thought as we see, generations moving and getting to new levels of thought, some of them good, some of them interesting is the word I'll use.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting indeed.
It's very indicative of new times.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do believe that there's no good way to put this. There's going to be some people that get into magic and mess themselves up.
Hmm.
And I like to think, just based on my own experience, those they're going to be tomorrow's teachers because they're going to say, don't do that because when I when I first got into magic,
Let me tell you a story.
yeah, yeah, I don't think it's going to rise to the point where in our time, well, I can't say ours. I'm 46, so I would say, if I live to be 100, then even if I live to be 100, I don't think that we're going to see in our time a decline in it. I think we're at the point now where it is just starting, where
Mhm.
where people are now uh, uh, looking out at alternative ways of viewing reality or viewing the world, and I think COVID had a lot to do with that because we're watching institutions crumble. We're
Mhm.
watching it, and so that informs us that there has to be a new way to do things. We don't only want to make our bodies COVID proof. We want to make the societies that we create to be COVID proof, and
Yeah.
so.
I like the way that you describe that because it really is. It's not just about the individual surviving. This is
Mm,
about the culture. This is about the people.
right.
The collective knowledge that we've been able to make it to. And I think that's that's the risk. Is there ever a risk of us reaching a point of like no return? Not in the sense that energy could ever be forever lost, right? Like
Right.
we couldn't lose something in this world, in our society, in our race that didn't already belong to the world all by itself. Like
Right.
we haven't contributed knowledge to the universe. We're a part of it.
Exactly.
Like, and I think a lot of times people get very egotistic, the human condition, so to speak, in this like, no, man, if humanity ain't it, then there's nothing. I was like, well, that'd be nice, but
Yeah, meanwhile, I'm listening to NPR and they're talking about a telescope that's able to see 100 million galaxies. Come on.
yeah, like what are you talking about? And like certain people, I'm like, I just don't think you made it or paid close enough attention in primary school. I'm not, I'm an asshole, so I can say these things. So, um, in general, I feel like critical thought in these things that inevitably you'll get there, right? You could be
Mhm.
on your deathbed, you could be born again. It doesn't really matter. Critical thought will arrive where there is stillness. There will be movement. Where there is chaos, there will inevitably be order. So it's like, do we need to worry about it? No, but it doesn't mean we're not affected by the current state and it couldn't be improved.
Right, right. It can definitely be improved, and you know, not only within in the realm of what we're calling magic, because I think most of the children being born like us actually, but it's a little bit more advanced, at least from my perception.
Mm-hmm.
For them, all of us are born into magic, and I think that the tools that they're being born into, regardless of what they call it, um, they start off with a significant head start from say when I came along in these late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's very promising. Um, some of them going to mess it up, some of them not, and they're going to be the caretakers, just as things have been.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that as a species, I think by the end of this century, I think magic would have been reconciled with most things in terms of how we live, you know. And I know that we can't see that right now because, you know, it's woe is me on every channel and station. But, you know, when you read a little bit of history, you know, this ain't the first time that it's been a woe is me on planet Earth. So we'll get through this. But I think that the children today are really and the young adults, don't get me wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm really excited about the children because I think they're developing in a different way. Like my daughters, they're 8 and 13 respectively, and they amaze me to no end. Just like things are so simple for them, you know. And so I just can't wait to see that generation take the world stage, and hopefully we would have given them a world that is still um, worth saving. Really,
Mm-hmm.
the thing today is to stop the adults today who are running the world from destroying it before the kids can get to it.
Yeah, and I think so, and I feel like that works as as a beautiful segue and transition into, the conclusion of our call, because that's our leaving point, right? Is this is where there is hope. This is where we can take joy. Because I completely agree. I have 3 kids, 7, 3, and 1, and
Woo!
in each one of them, they have taught me more about life, magic, what is important versus what I thought was important,
Hmm.
and in general they give me hope every day. My daughter believes more strongly, more devoutly than I think I could ever in my entirety, and about things that have matter and value to her irrespective of how I understand them, you know
Hmm.
and just they give me hope. And so I think that's where that they are who we are working for. I was had a friend, my sister, and equal in almost all regards. She would talk about, she's like, listen, we're not building a boat to save everybody, Mikael. We are building a boat to save those who know where to find the boat.
Right. Okay.
And I'm like, okay, this is going to be a much smaller boat. And suddenly things became much more attainable. They became much more doable. There wasn't this sense of grand end of the world. There was hope, because I can be good for my kids. Everybody else, no, I hate people. My
Yeah.
kids, I love them, and I can be good for them. And if any individual can find a reason to be good, if they can find hope in today for tomorrow, it's a good day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
so I want. Is there anything is there anything we can highlight, sponsor, or shout out for you? I just really appreciate you taking the time to come on and record with me today. Your dialogue is in depth and something that I take and enjoy like a fine sherry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I definitely I want to thank you for allowing me the chance to have this conversation with you. Um, I don't get to do it often with people who are responding, so I appreciate that. Um, in terms of, I did want to echo in terms of hope. I have a lot of it. I think the world is not coming to an end by any means. I think we're only just getting started. It's just something new. In terms of where people can find me, of course, they can find me at Soul Magic, SOL, like the sun, Magic, Magick. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Facebook under the same name. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name. And yeah, yeah. Feel free to inbox. I always follow back. And more importantly, we're going to get through this together. However, I can help anyone, I will.
And I absolutely I echo that to support Saul. I mean, he's an incredible teacher. If whether he sees it or not, he's got a story to tell, and he's defensive of the truth, tells it as it is. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on our podcast. Saul, be well, be blessed, my brother. Thank you for taking the time. I'll see you next time.
Blessings. Appreciate you.